A lot of people believe that Australians are some of the most friendliest, laid-back individuals on earth. And as an Australian myself, I couldn't disagree more. So about a week ago, I made a video about myself, an Australian, moving to America and just shared my experience. I tried to keep it as neutral as possible. And I really didn't think too much of it. Initially, the comments and feedback were quite positive, so I thought all was well. However, as the video remained up, more negative comments began to roll in. And take a guess who the main perpetrators were. Australians. While I'm super grateful to be born and raised in Australia, and I understand why so many people view it as the lucky country, there are a ton of social stigmas that go along with that. Now, don't get me wrong, I am so grateful that I was brought up in Australia, because if I was brought up in America as a youngster, I would have turned out a lot different. I was quite the wild child growing up, so I'm super grateful that I had the restrictions that I did back then. When I was 4 years old, my mum and I traveled to the United States to visit my aunt and uncle, and she almost wanted to stay here, but ultimately she decided that taking me back to Australia and raising me there was the right choice, and I'm forever grateful for that decision she made for me. Despite the US and Australia both being developed westernized countries, there's crazy differences between the US and Australia socially. Growing up in Australia, we learned from like a young age that anybody pursuing something that's like out of the norm are considered weird. This belief fosters the idea that anybody that's pursuing something out of the Aussie norm are likely to fail. In Australia, we call this tall poppy syndrome. According to Wikipedia, tall poppy syndrome refers to people with notable public success who excessively promote their own achievements and opinions. Intense scrutiny and criticism of such person is termed cutting down the tall poppy. So basically, anybody in Australia that is pursuing success and they're open about it, they are the tall poppy, and it's ingrained in Australian culture to cut them down. I feel like this social stigma comes from the early days of when Australia was a penal colony, because the really well behaved prisoners end up becoming the first police of Australia. So it's basically like there's old convicts and they're like, oh, you think you're better than me because you're trying to do something with your life. I feel like that whole stigma has just evolved and like still stuck in Australian culture from then up until now, basically. I'm not the only Australian that feels that way either. However, the reality is, unless you're like trying to become like a football player or you're opening your own business in the trades like plumbing or carpentry or something, people are going to look at you weird and judge you for like choosing that path. I experienced this tall poppy syndrome firsthand. Like when I first started making YouTube videos back home, my group of friends I had back then, like some of them like completely ostracized me, judged me. I was like kicked out of group chats. I was uninvited off skate sessions. Like a bunch of stuff happened. They would talk bad behind my back and stuff purely because I wanted to make videos and skate and post them on the internet. They did me like that. Just because of that old Australian tall poppy syndrome, which I believe comes from the convict days. And you know what I said at the fact of all them like switching up on me? I said, f them, like I don't need them. Like my pursuit of what I want to do is much greater than having fake mates around like that. So I just said, f them, did my own thing, stuck to my guns, and now we are here today. And I'm not alone in saying this. There are so many Australians I've spoken to and seen online that do believe that this whole social stigma isn't normal. In the USA, starting a career, trying to find your feet in like entertainment, music, whatever. It's so normal and acceptable here. And I've even met countless Americans out skating that I've told them about my channel and everything, and they're just like, right on, dude, more power to you. Keep it going, brother. Like they are so positive. Whereas Australians are kind of just like, oh yeah, you think that's going to go far, mate? Like they'll take the absolute piss out of you for trying to do something that isn't within the social norms of Australian society. And it's crazy to think there's a perspective change, because like Americans understand that those people doing something, it can happen. They can forge careers out of nothing. It's a real thing here. Whereas back home, it's not so common. So they don't think it's real. And they're conditioned to thinking that it's like lame or that you're a wanker for trying to do something that's like out of the norm. The Australian way of life is so simple. Like it's go to work, go to the pub, go to the footy game. It's really rare for Australians to kind of venture out of that social norm that exists within Australia. Nobody bats an eyelid when somebody wants to travel to Europe or they want to travel to Southeast Asia, but once you tell them like, oh, I'm going to go to the United States, that's when the coin flips. That's when it's like, the USA, why would you want to go to the United States for? Are you crazy? Why would you want to go to the States for, mate? You're more than likely to be shot walking to the corner store. Somebody actually commented that you're more likely to be shot walking to the corner store in the United States. Do you realize how closed-minded those beliefs are? Especially if you've never stepped foot in the US, but you're sitting in your safe, isolated island country back home being like, oh, you're going to get shot over there, or blah, 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 this or that. It's like, you haven't even been here. How would you have the experience and like the knowledge to understand what it's like being over here? So many Australians think you're going to be shot coming to America. It's crazy. What about the American family you see out on a day out in Darling Harbour, enjoying the country and taking it in for what it is? Do you think they're scared of like drop bears and koalas and spiders? No, they're there to see it for themselves and experience it for themselves. I honestly believe that Australians are as scared of guns as Americans are scared of spiders and snakes. And that's fine. If you don't feel comfortable coming to the US, don't. But the thing that gets me is just this pure entitlement to like judge how we live in this country. It's crazy. Nobody bats an eyelid when their friend wants to move to Spain for the summer, or when the couple that just got married head to Bali for their honeymoon. Australians struggle so hard to comprehend how we live in America. Like George Bush said,
they hate our freedoms.
Australians are so conditioned to believe that the Australian way of life is the only acceptable one in the Western world. Now, this is all about perspective, right? I'm super grateful for my Australian upbringing, but as I got older, I kind of started to realize things that I didn't quite like about living in Australia. Especially the last few years of me living in Australia, like the pandemic and how they handled it, I literally had to ask permission from the government to leave Australia, to basically leave. I had to write them an email and then tell them why I deserved to leave and blah, blah, blah. I basically had to like ask them for permission for me to leave. Does that sound like a free country to you? Now, a lot of Australians, this is funny, a lot of Australians are going to defend the government's response to COVID. But how do you forget things like what Dan Andrews did to Victoria, or that poor pregnant woman that got arrested for posting an event on Facebook? And she was charged with inciting a riot because she posted like an anti-lockdown event on Facebook. The next morning, like 7 a.m., 2 detectives come to the door and cuff her up and usher her away in front of her husband. And she was pregnant. It's like, how is that okay? I promised myself I wouldn't get too elbows deep in this because I just get so heated about it all. It's just so frustrating that so many Australians have such strong opinions on the US when they've never even been here. I know it's hard to understand this level of freedom. It blows your mind. Like one time I met a couple of Aussies out here that went shooting for the first time, and they were like, it's crazy that you can just have that technology and just be a person of the public here. And it's like, that's how much it tells me how conditioned people's brains are in Australia to just believe everything the government tells them. Don't get me wrong, neither country is perfect. Australia, on one hand, you have Centrelink, you have Medicare, you have Housing Commission. If you don't have a job for a bit, they'll hook you up with money. If you need to go see the doctor, they'll pay for that. If you don't have anywhere to live, they'll hook you up somewhere to stay. Like, there are so many safety nets in Australia for its Australian citizens. So you're really babysat by the government down there. But with that being said, there's a lot of things that you are not allowed to do, and you're very restricted in that sense. Whereas on the other hand, in the US, the government does not care about you, period. So you are here to fend for yourself, and with freedom comes a lot of responsibility. You've really got to keep all your bases covered, which can prove quite hard in the US. A lot of people end up homeless because they can't pay their medical bills. There's pros and cons to living in both countries. It just shits me when Australians have so much opinion on the US. And like I said, not everybody gets to experience true freedom. And with freedom comes significant responsibility. America, in its infancy, was an experiment. Before that point, it had been ruled by King George III miles away in England on the other side of the world. America literally could have been the Australia of the period if the Americans lost to the British Crown. Fortunately though, the Americans won their independence and pretty much kicked the British out after 160 years of being under British control. And that victory by the Americans sparked the need for a new place for English prisoners to go, which led to the establishment of Australia. So that's pretty crazy to think about. Like, if the Americans lost the War of Independence, this would be like Australia is right now. But since they won, they kicked the English out. The English were like, oh shit, we better find somewhere to send these English convicts. Like, what are we going to do? All the jails here are full. Some bloke just stole a loaf of bread. We put him in jail for 10 years. Let's send them to Australia. The British learned from the defeat against the Americans, and they imposed even stricter rules on their convicts, who eventually became some of Australia's first European settlers. And that's why so many Australians have absolutely no issue listening to government directives and living under the rule of a distant monarch. Without sounding too American and diving too deeply down this rabbit hole, but this needs to be addressed. And literally somebody called me a marga in my last video. They're like, you sound like a marga. Anyway, Australians have the hardest time just understanding the role that firearms play in this country, because it goes further than what you think. Like, think about the bloke that lives in Alaska. He's got to carry a 45 on his hip because there's wild bears. He's got to be able to defend himself going out in public against wild bears. Or the bloke that lives out on some land and has coyotes come in and attack his sheep and kill him. He needs to be able to defend his home and his livestock against wild animals. Or even just living in a house here. You want to be able to defend your home. Your family lives there. You live there. Let me ask you this. You're living in Sydney. A group of 20-year-olds kick your front door in at 2 a.m. with machetes. They want your car keys. They want your money. They want your jewelry. You think if you dial 000 that the police are going to get there like that? They're not. At least here, you have the right to defend yourself in your home within means. Your life isn't up to the hands of somebody else. You don't have to wait for, the police to come to your house or whatever. You're able to defend yourself from the first hand, which I know is hard to understand because things of that nature didn't really happen in Australia until the last few years. But take a look at that incident at Bondi, that crazy bloke that ran through the shopping centre there, the Westfields, with a blade and stabbed a bunch of people. There was families, children, they all seen that horrific scene. And the one person that had the ability to do anything about that was that one solo copper with a gun. She went in there by herself, hats off to her, and took care of business. Think about the good guy with the gun. You can't just think about the government that has the guns that they're going to protect you. People are evil. People are going to do evil regardless. Just because you live in Australia and you have a water border doesn't mean that evil ceased to exist down there. Evil exists everywhere. People are going to do evil no matter what. With all that being said, dear Australians, please open your minds. Stop watching the media. Stop believing everything the media tells you about America. And please stop being so opinionated about how we live our lives over here. I've chosen this path for my life and it's paid off, which is crazy because when I announced on my YouTube channel that I was moving to California, people dead ass unsubscribed. They're like, I've supported you this far. I can't do it anymore. I feel like the decision you're making is stupid and I'm out. That's how deeply people take this decision of me as an Australian moving to America. It just blows my mind. Like, literally, worry about your own backyard. Go outside, breathe in fresh air, touch grass. See you guys in the next video.
Red, I want you to go to his house. Blow that joint up, don't let nobody out. Oh, get Trigger Man, bring him to me, cause I'm tired of this Trigger Man stuff in Tennessee. Now all the time while this stuff is going on, I called up another roadie on my flip phone. Junior, I want you to call down to Texas, special order